They said he could win a war without firing a single shot. To Washington, he was a strategist. To his enemies, he was a ghost. Edward Lansdale didn't wear power like a uniform. He wore it like a rumor. He was the kind of man who could walk into chaos and make it believe in order. Born in Detroit, raised on ideals and illusions, he didn't dream of war. He dreamed of persuasion. Before the CIA, before the Philippines, before Vietnam, he worked in advertising, selling products, selling dreams. He understood that people didn't buy facts, they bought beliefs, and that, in the coming Cold War, would be the most dangerous weapon of all. In 1945, the world was a graveyard of ideas. Empires had fallen, flags were burning. The United States had the bomb, the Soviets had the fear, and somewhere between both, the future of the world was up for sale. That's when Lansdale appeared, not as a soldier, but as a salesman of freedom. He was sent to the Philippines, a country on the edge of collapse. The communist Huck rebellion ruled the jungles, preaching equality with a rifle in hand. Villages vanished, convoys burned, and every night whispers filled the air, of rebels, of spirits, of something lurking in the dark. Lansdale listened. He didn't laugh. He didn't send tanks. He sent stories. In the villages of Luzon, he learned that fear wasn't just emotion, it was infrastructure. If you could build it, you could live inside it. He began a campaign that would make the Pentagon blush and poets applaud. When his men found a rebel sympathizer, they didn't kill him in daylight. They made it look like a monster did it. 2 small puncture wounds, drained of blood, and a rumor spread by dawn. The aswang, they called it, the vampire of Philippine folklore. The villagers whispered, the rebels panicked. Entire units fled, convinced the jungle had turned against them. Lansdale smiled. "This," he wrote in a report, "is how you fight belief with belief." Back in Washington, no one understood him. He wasn't a soldier, he wasn't a spy. He was something new, the first engineer of psychological warfare. He convinced generals that propaganda could be deadlier than artillery, that a rumor, well-timed, could win a province, that one fabricated ghost could save 1,000 lives. To his superiors, he was eccentric. To the locals, he was a myth. To history, he would become a template. The man who proved the battlefield of the future was the human mind. But power built on imagination is fragile, and Lansdale knew it. He walked through villages he had saved and saw the faces of those who didn't believe anymore. Children who no longer feared ghosts, only soldiers. Men who whispered his name not with gratitude but dread. He called it winning hearts and minds, but in the silence of the jungle, the hearts were empty and the minds were afraid. Still, Washington loved results. The communists were retreating, and the CIA was taking notes. Edward Lansdale had created a formula: belief plus fear, plus control. By the early 1950s, he was summoned back to the United States. He returned not as a major, but as a myth-maker. He gave speeches about invisible wars, about winning through ideas. He spoke softly, like a teacher, but every word carried the weight of something unseen. The audience saw a man in a suit. What they didn't see was the shadow he'd left in the jungle. Behind the applause, a quiet realization grew inside him. He had changed the Philippines, but he had also changed himself. He'd learned that the line between influence and manipulation is thin, and once you cross it, you never come back. He looked at his hands once and said to a friend, "It's not the blood that haunts me, it's the belief." When the Cold War shifted toward Indochina, the CIA remembered him. They needed a man who could build a government from the ashes of fear, someone who could sell democracy to people who had never seen it, someone who could make them believe. Edward Lansdale was perfect. He packed his suitcase, his notebooks, and a new set of ideas, and flew toward the rising heat of Vietnam. He didn't know it yet, but the ghosts he had created in the jungles of Luzon were already waiting for him in Saigon. Before you scroll, remember, Every story like this takes hours to craft. If you want to keep uncovering the hidden wars and forgotten minds of history, subscribe and let's go deeper together. Would you call it genius or manipulation? When Lansdale landed in Saigon, the air was thick with heat and suspicion. Vietnam was still a ghost of French rule, broken, divided, and waiting for a savior. Washington wanted someone to lead, someone they could trust. Lansdale promised he could find that man, or build him. He met Ngo Dinh Diem, a nationalist, devout Catholic, calm but ambitious. To the world, Diem looked like a quiet bureaucrat. To Lansdale, he looked like an opportunity. He told Washington, he's the one. But the truth was simpler. Lansdale didn't just find leaders, he invented them. He taught Diem how to smile for the camera, how to speak in American phrases, how to sound like democracy, even when he ruled like a monarch. He rewrote speeches, designed posters, shaped his image like a brand. "You're not just a man," he told Diem. "You're the symbol of freedom." Behind the curtain, Lansdale played every string. He spread leaflets in the countryside praising Diem as the chosen one. He hired poets, priests, even rumor merchants to whisper his name into every village. To peasants, he became a saint. To the CIA, a miracle. But the miracle had cracks. Diem was stubborn, proud, and blind to the people's pain. He dismissed his critics as traitors. When monks protested, he called it treason. The country he was meant to unite began to split beneath his feet. North and south, rich and poor, loyalists and rebels. Lansdale tried to hold the illusion together. He visited Diem's palace, advising him softly, "You need their trust, not their fear." But Diem only smiled. Fear is trust, if you hold it tightly enough. It was then Lansdale realized something. His creation had outgrown him. The puppet had learned to pull its own strings. He watched as Diem's regime turned the promise of democracy into a cage. Elections were rigged, critics disappeared. The people whispered that the Americans had built a dictator in the name of freedom. Lansdale felt the weight of every lie he had ever written. Yet Washington kept sending praise and money. Stability, they called it. Progress. They didn't see the storm forming behind the palace walls. Lansdale walked the streets of Saigon at night. No guards, no entourage. Just the sound of fans turning in empty windows and the echo of his own thoughts. He had once conquered fear with myth. Now he was watching a myth turn into fear itself. He wrote in his journal, "We made him believe he was chosen by God, and now he believes it." In the quiet of his hotel room, he lit a cigarette, stared at the ceiling, and whispered, "Maybe I'm not the ghost who fought with fear. Maybe I'm the one who set it free." Do you think he lost control, or did he simply realize that control never existed? By 1956, Saigon glittered with American dollars and French decay. The war hadn't begun yet, but the tension already smelled like smoke. In cafes, men whispered about freedom. In the alleys, children played war with wooden guns. The city looked alive. But everything beneath it was theater, and Edward Lansdale was still the director. He was no longer just a CIA officer, he was the invisible minister of Vietnam. Every policy, every slogan, every symbol ran through him. He built schools, radio stations, and propaganda teams that turned Diem's speeches into gospel. Posters showed smiling farmers, happy soldiers, clean streets, but out in the villages, the real war was growing. Poverty, resentment, and silence. To the Vietnamese, Lansdale was a mystery. He walked through markets alone, shook hands with children, spoke in broken phrases that somehow made people trust him. He wrote stories for newspapers that never mentioned his name, and yet his fingerprints were everywhere, from the fake miracles in the countryside to the speeches broadcast at dawn. He was rewriting a nation, one rumor at a time. But illusions don't last forever. Behind the photos and parades, men began to disappear. Journalists who asked the wrong questions. Officers who doubted Diem's orders. students who believed in something beyond the propaganda. The illusion cracked and the truth bled through. Lansdale began to feel it. The weight of too many lies, the echo of too many stories that had turned against their tellers. He tried to warn Diem, but his voice no longer mattered. The palace walls had closed around the president like a fortress made of faith and fear. The Americans still believed they were building democracy. Lansdale knew they were building a ghost, something that looked alive but had no soul. He watched Diem's face harden in every meeting. The man he had shaped into a hero was becoming what he once fought against, the very image of tyranny. And yet Lansdale couldn't walk away. He was trapped between pride and guilt, between faith in his methods and fear of their consequences. Every lie he told had saved a life. But every truth he buried was now coming back for him. He once wrote to a colleague, "The greatest enemy of America isn't communism. It's the belief that we can control what people dream." In those words, you could feel the ghost of the Philippines, the jungle, the bloodless bodies, the whispers of vampires, all coming back to haunt him. He looked out over the city one night, neon lights flickering on wet streets, and realized he had built an empire of illusions, the kind that collapses the moment someone stops believing. If you've come this far, take a moment. Like, subscribe, and help us keep uncovering the stories the world forgot to tell. Do you think America wanted to save Vietnam, or simply wanted to see its own reflection in it? By 1960, the illusion was breaking. The jungles of Vietnam were alive again, not with superstition this time, but with fire. The Viet Cong had risen from the shadows, and Saigon trembled beneath its own lies. For years, Lansdale had built a dream of stability. Now he was watching it rot from within. Reports filled his desk, villages burned, officers defected, priests killed, soldiers ambushed by men they once trained. The country was splitting faster than he could mend it. Washington wanted to believe everything was under control. They always did. But Lansdale knew better. The ghosts were back. He visited Diem one last time. The old confidence was gone, replaced by paranoia. Diem no longer trusted anyone, not even his own brother. "They whisper against me," Diem said. "They think I've lost God's favor." Lansdale looked at him and saw not a president but a man consumed by the very fear he had once used to rule. The Americans talked of replacing him, but no one dared say it aloud. Lansdale still defended him, not out of loyalty, but guilt. "We made him what he is," he told a colleague. "We can't destroy him just because he became what we needed him to be." But power doesn't forgive hesitation. As 1963 approached, whispers became plans. The CIA made contact with generals ready to strike. Lansdale begged them to reconsider, not for Diem's sake, but for Vietnam's. He had seen this movie before. Once you kill a myth, it doesn't die. It multiplies. Then came November 1st, 1963. The coup. Tanks on the streets of Saigon. The palace surrounded. Shots in the night. Ngo Dinh Diem and his brother fled through hidden tunnels, praying for mercy that would never come. Hours later, their bodies were found in the back of an armored truck. Lansdale heard the news in his office. He didn't speak, didn't move. He just stared at the radio, listening to the static between sentences. The puppet was gone, and with him, the illusion that America could build nations out of fear. He walked outside into the Saigon heat, past the posters still bearing Diem's smiling face, the slogans of freedom that now meant nothing. The crowds were cheering, but not for democracy. They were cheering because the show was over. That night, Lansdale wrote one final note to himself. "I fought a war of ghosts, and in the end, I became one." He packed his bags, boarded a flight back to Washington, and disappeared quietly into history. No medals, no ceremony, just silence. Can a man fight monsters without becoming one himself? Back in Washington, the corridors were colder. The world had moved on. New wars, new generals, new illusions. Edward Lansdale became a ghost in his own country. He still wore the same thin smile, still talked about winning hearts and minds, but the spark in his eyes had dimmed. He was sent to the Pentagon, to advise, to write, to remember, but every report he read sounded the same. Progress, stability, victory. Words he'd used once to paint over chaos, words that had built the empire of illusions he now wished he could erase. Sometimes at night he'd walk alone past the monuments of power, the Capitol dome glowing above him, the wind whispering through flags. He'd think about the jungles of Luzon, the faces of villages, the stories he'd told, the lies that became truths. The ghosts he'd created were still out there, haunting new wars under different names. He knew it now. Fear never disappears. It just changes uniform. The Cold War had become a philosophy, control through belief, dominance through imagination, and he had helped invent it. Lansdale tried one last time to speak against it. He wrote letters, memos, essays that warned of the danger of turning foreign hearts into tools. He said America was losing something sacred, not ground, not prestige, but conscience. No one listened. He retired quietly in 1963, the same year Kennedy was shot. 2 years later, Vietnam erupted into full-scale war. The country he tried to shape with ideas was now drowning in napalm. His theories of persuasion were replaced by carpet bombs. From his small house in Virginia, he watched it all on television. The same kind of flickering screen he once used for propaganda films. He saw the smiling faces of new officials repeating his phrases, his methods, his ghosts. Only now they no longer needed him. He aged fast. Friends said he looked like a man who had seen too much and understood too late. In his final years, he stopped talking about victory. He talked about mercy. "We built nations out of fear," he once said. "But no one told us fear doesn't build, it corrodes." In 1987, Edward Lansdale died quietly. No ceremony, no grand farewell, just a name fading in the footnotes of Cold War history. But his legacy lived on. In every psychological operation, every whisper campaign, every government that learned how to rule through fear instead of faith. They called him the ghost who fought with fear. But maybe he was never fighting it. Maybe he was just trying to understand it. If you made it here, take a moment, subscribe and share the story, because history's real battles aren't fought with bullets. They're fought inside the mind. Do you think fear is still the most powerful weapon in the world today?